coming back here in studio with Dan and Shayne. And I'm curious on your thoughts on this, Shayne, because we were talking with Josh about the idea. This is an interesting scenario. I know, like we said, I know people aren't happy that the Lions are not headed towards the playoffs, but that's done. The Band-Aid's ripped off. We got to move on from that particular subject. And so now there's a lot to be settled here, not only with what schedule they'll have next year, but what draft pick, whether they finish over 500 or under 500 in this next game. And it's all happening against a team that took their offensive coordinator and a lot of their staff and several of their players and are doing better, at least in this year. The advanced statistics are very close between Chicago and Detroit. We discussed that on Sports Intel with our Chicago expert, Rob Huff. But I'm curious where you lie as a former player, as somebody that's seen virtually every scenario. You were also coach. This is kind of a tough one. I can see an argument for either side, but your opinion is infinitely more valuable on kind of what direction you see this going and what direction you kind of would like to see it go.
Well, whenever I think about how the last game of a season is played, sometimes it's you're trying to get into playoffs. It's a desperation move. Sometimes it's you're already out, and you've already got guys. In the NFL, you got guys, if they know that they're not in the playoffs, they've already booked flights for vacations, and that is a thing. Certain players on the team, when they find out about that, get upset because they're saying, "Hey, you're distracted. You're not even thinking about playing. You're already in the Bahamas or whatever." What happens with that is it's your resume. I mean, that game goes on your resume. So I don't think that there's ever any player that would ever purposely tank for a better draft pick, because that draft pick might be replacing them. And when a team doesn't have the success that they wanted, there's usually a lot of searching for the scapegoat. And is it a salary cap issue? Is it a superstar that's getting paid a lot of money? Do we try to bring somebody else in younger? If you're a bubble guy that hasn't really proven yourself, do we try to get somebody that is proven? If you're a guy that you've just started to come into a little bit of some success, are you used as a leverage for trading for the draft? Like, you don't know. So you have to keep your value and create your value with your play. So you've got to have pride and intrinsic motivation that you don't need people to push you along. You need to do it for yourself, because ultimately doing it for yourself is going to be doing it for the team as well. But I just think it needs to be something that you treat it like it's the biggest game of your life. And honestly, I always have this thing that I do with the guys that I train. If they haven't had me do this to them yet, it's always like a test that I do with them. No matter where they're standing on the field, I'll hand them a football and say, "Show me your best kick." And ultimately, 90% of them start walking back to 60 yards so they can show me a 60-yard field goal. And I'll give you one guess. If I let them kick it, what happens? They usually try to kick it as hard as they can, and the ball doesn't go anywhere near where they're wanting it to go. Ultimately, that's a test that says every time you perform, it is your best performance. It is. So when I give you a football and say, "Show me your best kick," you can literally set it down right where you're standing or move up close. It doesn't matter. That is going to be the best kick of your life, because it's the only kick you have right now. So when you have a chance to play as a professional football player and you realize how blessed and fortunate you are, that game has to be treated like it's the most important game you've played, because it's the one you're playing right now.
We have a lot of stories like this on the Lions, because I think back to last year where they were headed towards the playoffs, but in those last games did mean something. They were playing the Vikings basically for the division at the end of the season. But you had a guy like Christian Mahogany, who was a guard that played the last two games and then basically won a starting spot for this year based on those two games of last year. You got a young guy like Isaac Slaw who gets drafted in the third round. He wasn't even invited to some of the main camps and showcases in college football, the Senior Bowl or anything like that. So he had to play his way in, and he had to have a very good performance in one of the lower ranked ones to earn his way up to even be seen by a lot of these teams. And then that one performance then probably raised his draft position by multiple rounds and ended up with uniting him with his childhood team because he's here from Hudsonville. So there's a lot of examples. The best one probably for you, Shayne, on this team is a guy like Jake Bates. Him kicking balls in now the UFL, but at the time the XFL, I believe he was on the XFL side, but the USFL, UFL, XFL world, he was kicking balls in Ford Field and getting a showcase there. And a lot of people would say, well, but you're in that league. Well, clearly Detroit was paying attention. He's in their state, he's in their arena, and then he becomes one of the best kickers in the league, especially last year. This year he still had a solid year because he treated those games. He took that ball like you do with your students there. He took that ball and he treated every ball that he kicked like the one that needed to get him to the NFL, and a couple of those 60-yarders did get him to the NFL.
Yeah. And it's like with anything that you put effort into, if you're not purely intentional and you don't give it your best effort, there's a phrase that I like to say, I never do anything halfway. We'll just say that. Sometimes that can be a good thing because I put so much effort into the things that I really care about that I know that I don't leave anything on the table and I don't give it a chance to have any regrets over how I handled something. Sometimes because I get a little gung-ho, it probably gets me in trouble, if I'm being honest, in smaller things in life, I guess. But, whether it's, a remedial task or you're playing a professional football game, if you don't treat it like it's the most important thing you're doing, then it's going to show up. Whether it's your performance, your attitude, something's going to not really be there, and people are going to notice. And that's just something where I believe in, have one speed and that's go. I know that's kind of Charlie Sheen or whatever, but just go and do it. Have intention, be purposeful. And I think that's a really big lesson that I try to give to not only my clients, but just when I do keynote speaking, when I do, any of the motivational stuff that I do, it's you have to have full intention and purpose, or you're just going to be spinning your tires and not going anywhere. And that doesn't get anything productive done for anybody.
Exactly. They say character is doing something the same way, putting that effort in when no one's watching.
Yeah.
And that's what you need to get. We were talking about that a little bit in the break. Get up to, like Shayne did, the top 0.0001% of a field that's very difficult. You have to have that mindset. You have to be motivated. That's you talked about tanking, Shayne, and how players never tank, and I always believed that to be true. Because I remember that being a discussion 2 or 3 years ago when the Dolphins were having kind of almost a historically bad season. There was issues with the coaching, that the organization was kind of falling apart at the seams, and there were people on ESPN and other platforms making allegations, former players even, saying that these players were tanking. And not only one, I don't think that their motivation and their character and all of that would allow them to do that. 2, it would be flat dangerous to tank in specifically the NFL. You could do it in other sports, but it would be dangerous in the NFL. And then 3, that Dolphins team started to tick up by the end of the season too. So the allegations of tanking, they were winning games they shouldn't have with guys that were maybe at the edge of the 53-man roster or on the practice squad or on another team's practice squad or off the street. right? And those guys, to your point, Shayne, earned jobs by being on a team that was quote unquote tanking. They of course weren't tanking, but a team that wasn't headed to the playoffs, that wasn't going anywhere that year. They got jobs maybe with the Dolphins, but with other teams by playing their hardest and taking advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah, and when you put something, what we would say, put it on paper, that's your resume, and that is your body of work. And if you're a race car and everyone sees that the car's not going very fast, well, no one's going to want to drive that car anymore. No one's going to want to have that driver, or whatever the case may be. You want something that has a reputation. You want something that has reliability. And when you see inconsistency like that, I think, with management, with coaches, other players, leadership within the players, and you see it as something that will fester, and you see it as a toxic cancer that you want to get away from. And, you don't want to take a chance, not only of if you're playing lazy or you're playing a little behind step, one, you might get hurt, you might get injured. Two, you're risking your career, and it's just not worth it, in my opinion.
No, there's so many things to play for. So that's what the Lions have this week. Well, these Lions players, Bears players, both sides, and then the rest of the league. They're always playing for a lot. So when somebody like me sitting on their couch says, "Oh yeah, well no, they're not, they're giving up. They're never giving up," because like Shayne said, that could get you hurt or end your career, and it's a very lucrative potential career, so that you're never going to have motivation for that. But it's an interesting discussion. We're going to take a quick break and come back and close out the show and have a little bit more discussion here. So stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Coming back, having a good conversation about kind of the motivations of the NFL and the players here. But yeah, I'm curious to see how this game goes here, Shayne, with the Bears and Lions, because there's so many storylines. I think at the beginning of the season, we were all hoping, well, at least I was, that it was going to be, it was close to being for the division. If a couple of those games went differently for the Lions, because we didn't go into this as much as I wanted to with Josh Helmer, but he's got a good article on this on LinesWire, so go check it out. But there's a lot of metrics to the fact, because people say, well, the Lions underperformed, they're 8-8, but there's a lot of metrics to the fact that whether it's expected win totals, DVOA, which is a good measure of your defensive performance and how it should have shaken out, they're 2 wins, I think, above where they're below where they were supposed to be. The Bears are a couple wins above what they were supposed to be. Now, there's a lot of things that factor into that. It doesn't mean they should have lost. It means that they were good in some of those clutch situations. The Bears have shown that all year. They've won several games right at the final bell, and that's a testament to Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson and a lot of the other guys there. But at the same time, these are 2 teams that were pretty close. But as you made a good point about this, I think in the Helmer interview, about how the ball has 2 sides to it and it can bounce 2 different ways. And the Lions are one side of that this year, and the Bears are the other side. And the Lions want to get it so they can get that ball bouncing back to them next year. And you can do a lot in this game to set yourself up for that.
And that's the funny thing about the NFL is, yeah, there's going to be some talent that stands out here and there, but everybody on every single team is the best in the world to a degree of what they do. And so the parity is going to run pretty even with just a few little anomalies here and there, and those are the teams that, create better culture and, who know with the play calling and a couple players standing out. But there are so many games in the NFL that you could flip a coin and just have no idea who's going to win. I think that's why the average point margin might be a little over 3 points.
Probably something mistaken. Like that, yeah.
I know it's a 1-score average point margin of victory in the NFL, and that's why things could really go either way in any situation, no matter how good a team is doing or how bad a team is doing on that day. Any given Sunday, as they say, it can really just go one way or the other.
Exactly. I mean, it's just such an interesting game overall, and that's why it's nice to have you in here to be able to study the nuances of it, because one of the things that kind of aggravates me as far as the radio market side of things, and we're seeing this come out with the 8-8 Lions, is because now I have a lot of people in my life that'll say, oh, well, I listened to this other show and they were talking about this in the radio market. And there's so much negativity that comes out of being even just 8-8, which isn't bad. That's exactly 500. There's a lot of factors, like we talked about, that factor into that. But and you've talked before, Shayne, about kind of having to block this stuff out, and you guys don't listen to the media, nor should you. I mean, that really shouldn't factor in. I think there is something to be said for being part of the media that is understanding of the player side, where I've always leaned that way, and you being on the show now has helped me do that more. But I think there's a reason that players have a little bit of a distrust of the media, because some guy that could never kick an extra point, let alone a 50-yard field goal under a ton of pressure, or handle a drop back as a quarterback, or whatever the different position is, will stand there and say, oh, well, he's got to do better, the coach has got to be fired. And people have been firing Dan Campbell all year. There's a lot of people that want Ben Johnson back instead of Dan Campbell. A lot of silly things get said that are very short-sighted, but I like on this show that we look at kind of some of the things that are the root causes of a lot of this stuff, and then try to explain it and then move forward in a positive way, versus, okay, let's fire everybody. That's easy and also not productive in any sort of way.
Yeah, and there's always going to be impulse decisions made, and sometimes people are trigger happy, and just, sometimes it's a little bit of CYA, like sometimes management or executive or front office or whatever, they're going to cover their own tails because something's got to happen, and someone above them wants answers, so they're like, well, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to do something. And sometimes that's making a fire or making a personnel change, or as they like to tell us when they were letting us go, and you were not going to make the team, we're going to go in another direction. I think sometimes those things aren't always the right decision, but that's just how it works. And unfortunately, when you have a losing season, you have a lot more of those impulse decisions that happen because someone's trying to cover their own tail so they don't get fired.
It's a great point, because this happens all the time, where maybe there's a lot of circumstances that happen that make the job very difficult for the head coach, and a lot of it could involve personnel and different things, but the general manager isn't always going to go, oh, this one's on me, let me fire myself. There's not a lot of general managers that will fire themselves, but they'll get rid of coaches, or coaches will get rid of downline coaches, and that may happen this year with the Lions. They lost both coordinators last year. We were hoping for some continuity this year, but Morton was obviously relieved of the play calling duties. He was still on the team and part of the mix, but then you have Kelvin Shepard, who Campbell wouldn't necessarily commit to either. But we also have, in addition to the Lions-Chicago game that we'll be watching, there's also a couple key games that'll be basically for the division or for playoff rankings. You got the big-time Sunday night game with Seattle and San Francisco. You've got the Carolina-Tampa game that'll be for the division. One of those teams, they're about at the same place as the Lions as far as record goes, but one of those teams is going to make the playoffs and host a game here. So some of it, talking about the way the things bounce, some of it is about what division you play in. This is a tough division, the NFC North. The South wasn't quite as good this year, but I'm curious if you have any, because you obviously bounced around the league a little bit. Were you in, I think I can think of one or two situations potentially in your career, were you in a game like that where you were playing to play into the playoffs at the last game of the season?
Yeah, quite a few times actually. And, once or twice we had them go our way, and a few times we had them go the other way. A team that wasn't playing well just comes out and has a great game, and we just weren't running on all cylinders. Or we played really well, and it allowed us to be in the position to still have a chance. And then sometimes you got to have something else happen. Another team has to lose or something like that, and that sometimes can be a thing as well. But that's always where, coaches say, like, we like to be in charge of our own destiny. We'd rather have taken care of business and made our hay when we can, so that we're not pressuring and pushing ourselves unrealistically at the very end, because no one really wants to be in that position. But if you get there, you deal with it. You just have to not treat it as if it's a something to lose situation. I always tell guys, when I hear this phrase, they're playing with nothing to lose. When I hear coaches say that, they usually get it right, and then they keep going a little too far, and I don't like that. If you play with nothing to lose, you're dangerous. That means you're not hesitating, you're pulling all the punches, you're playing aggressive. As soon as you say the other team is playing with nothing to lose, so we better be careful. I've heard coaches say, so we better be careful. No, that's the worst thing. Then we need to play like we have nothing to lose as well. That's the only way to do it, because if you play with nothing to lose, you're not going to second guess yourself and hesitate and create doubt within your decision making, instead of just playing on your instincts and calling the calls you're going to call and making the steps you're going to make for your techniques and all the things you do. You have to look at every single one of them as, I don't care if that game you lose, you're out, and you have something to lose. You have to play it like you have nothing to lose, and you're not afraid of the result of what could happen, so that you can actually play through the process of controlling the result.
Exactly. You have to match the ferocity there, because I feel like we have a ton of examples of this in sports, not just football, but all sports, where the teams that pull back and get too conservative, even in the gameplay. Oh, okay, I've got the lead. Let's just run the ball. Let's just lay back. That's usually not a good strategy. I don't have to be a former football coach and player to know that, like yourself. You see that all the time, that you pulling back doesn't usually have a benefit there.
I don't think football's got a version of the Dean Smith four corners offense. That's probably the only way it was ever successful. And the shot clock obviously got rid of that. But in football, when you start seeing the play calling becoming very cautious, it usually doesn't work well. I mean, there's a reason why there's a higher success rate. I'm not sure. I'd have to look this up. But I've always felt like when teams run their 2-minute offense, that they're usually pretty dang good at it for the most part. And I always said, why don't we run every play like it's your 2-minute offense, and let's try to catch the other team off guard. Let's just throw our best plays at them, and the ones that we know are going to work, and just go. And sometimes when I see a little over calculation, I think there's a phrase, I'm blanking on it right now. Something about over something. I'm really blanking on it right now, so I feel bad about that. But I think when you overanalyze,
paralysis by
analysis.
There you go. Good job, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I was brain. Oh boy. Okay. I think when you create that paralysis because you're just overthinking everything, it creates a problem instead of just like, hey, here's our plan, go. And I think that's the best way to do it.